Hello again, and welcome back to the layout. In this video, I will show you guys how I use CelluClay to create this embankment and how I use it in smaller applications. I will go over my thoughts and pros and cons I have using CelluClay. So I will show you two examples of smaller applications, and then I will use this embankment as my bigger application. Now, let's get started. So the CelluClay in question is this big boy I bought from Michaels. This bag was $40 and I knew it would be too much for what I needed on my layout, but I was thinking ahead and I could use it for a layout in the future. Before we get started with this video, this is my cat Sebastian. He thought he belonged on set whenever I was filming these shots. Now we're back to regular scheduled programming. So for CelluClay, all you do is just add water. There's no specific amount. What I do is I just grab a clump of the CelluClay, I throw it in a bowl, and I add water and just kind of mix it until it's a consistency I feel like I can work with. In this shot, I switched to mixing it with one hand. I would normally do two, but just for the sake of it being seen on camera, I just switched it around my fingers with one hand. I added more CelluClay to the mix because I found it was still a little too runny, a little too much water in the mix. Adding more CelluClay thickened it up just so it's easier to work with. So before I transfer this CelluClay onto the layout, we do have to go back in time a little bit. It will make sense, but it's just to kind of showcase one of the applications I use this CelluClay for. So this footage here was captured a while ago. It just shows me carving up some of the foam on the layout. I didn't really know what to do with it. I shot it with the intent of using it, so I think it is justified in this part of the video. And I did mention in my layout tour video about carving foam, but I never showed any of it. So here is a good example of carving up an area, and then after I'm done carving, I'll go back and show where I put this CelluClay, and hopefully it makes a lot more sense in this kind of application. Carving foam like this does get pretty messy, so periodically I'll take the vacuum and then clean up the mess, and then just repeat this cycle. Now let's get back on track using CelluClay. So what you'll start to notice here is these big gouges and holes in the foam, and that was caused just by cutting too much with the knife when I was kind of carving this scene out. One of the applications you can use CelluClay for is to go back and fill in all of these big gouges. I decided to use CelluClay to fill in these gouges because when I was going to add my first layer of scenery, I didn't want any of it to kind of fall into these holes and cracks, so it'll leave a nice smooth surface over it and kind of just be one with the foam. So the method here is to grab about a pinch and then smear it over the holes and kind of push it into the holes and then smooth out the top. I don't always run my trains whenever I'm working, but packing in this CelluClay didn't seem too involved, so I figured it was a safe bet letting my trains kind of pass by this work area. What I'm doing now with the CelluClay is using it as a bit of a transition from the sloped portion to the flat ground. And you can see that line there kind of to the right. And I thought that was a bit jarring and I wanted to smooth it out. So whenever I apply paint and scenery, it creates kind of, like I said, a nice subtle transition from the slope to the flat portion of the foam. Another way to apply CelluClay is in this application, and what I'm doing here is I'm using it to fill in and smooth out this dip in the foam. And the key here to work with it is just to continuously bat it down and smooth it out and to get it how exactly you want it. And that's pretty key when you work with CelluClay because it's not a self-leveling material. So once you have it batted down and smoothed out to exactly where you want it, that is how it's gonna dry. Like I showed previously, this method here is just doing the same where I take the CelluClay and kind of combine the stacks of foam with the surface just to make a seamless transition in the scenery. Right here, what I'm doing is I'm kind of spreading the CelluClay a little more evenly. I'm pushing it to the right side because I put a little too much CelluClay down. It kind of clumped up in some areas, so I'm just evenly spreading it along this foam here. What I'm doing now is taking my fingers to really smear and smooth out the CelluClay up into the foam, and this really helps the seamless transition into the foam. You don't really see a crease or a hard line, kind of where the CelluClay stops and the foam starts. If you are curious what these playing cards are for, what they do is they create just a small enough gap between the foam and the hardboard backdrop. Sometime in the future, if I want to, I can put like a paper backdrop in between the foam and the hardboard, and it'll fit just snug enough that there isn't like a noticeable gap between the foam and the backdrop. So for the last small application of the CelluClay, I'm gonna use it to continue this hill upwards and fill in that gap where that kind of step up in the foam is. For the CelluClay here, I use the same method I've been kind of showing in my previous examples, and that's just to slop down the CelluClay, kind of spread it over the area you need it, and in this particular location, I'm gonna make sure it's level with that kind of step up in the foam and continue that downhill trajectory out of frame And it's the same method to bat it down and even it out and smooth it. And you just kind of got to work with it until you're happy with its look. Something else I'd like to touch on with CelluClay is it can get pretty sticky when working with it, and I think that's depending on how much water's in the batch or kind of how thick it is. And to overcome that, what I do is I wet down my hand, and working with it with wet fingers, your fingers kind of glide over the top of the CelluClay, making it a lot easier to kind of smooth out, bat down, or just kind of work with it in general. So now we're finally using CelluClay in a lot bigger of an application. Here is the embankment like I showed in the intro. I shot this on my iPhone a while back, and just like all the other methods before, here I just slapped down CelluClay, but this time a ton of CelluClay, knowing how much area I had to cover. And the great thing about CelluClay is you can continuously stack it on itself, and it won't really sag or droop or fall kind of out of form. It's dense enough that it holds up on its own, at least in this fashion, where it just kind of serves as a landmass. And so what I'm doing here is I'm just applying it and adding kind of enough to the middle here, like the bulk of the CelluClay, to where it has this sloped embankment. And this was actually the first time I used CelluClay, and I was very happy with the results and how it all came together. So what I'm adding here, I'm trying to replicate the real life location. And if you notice, using this reference shot, along the slope closer to the track, it looks like they added some more land. You can kind of tell there's like the darker soil there. I'm not really sure what that was for, maybe to help with erosion, but I figured I would kind of model it with CelluClay along this small kind of scene here. So if you notice along the edge of the CelluClay where the foam is, there's that white line. That is some of it that's already dried. But what I did is I waited a day to let it tack up and become a little more firm. It didn't become too firm, but just enough to add this additional CelluClay that kind of models that added soil at the real life location. And then after 2 days, to let it kind of firm up a little bit more, I took this toothpick to add all these erosion marks. Kind of my main point here with the multiple days is CelluClay takes a long time to dry, especially if you apply it super thick and dense like this. If it's smaller of an application, it can dry in a day or so. But then the positive of having a long dry time is after you applied it and you're not super happy with maybe how it turned out, you still have plenty of time to go back and make modifications so the scene is exactly how you envisioned it. Speaking of long drying times, let's fast forward to see the end results. Starting with this area where I carved out the foam,
I actually forgot to get footage once the CelluClay dried, only after applying this paint. But you can really tell how well the CelluClay blends in with the foam and is actually a really nice texture even before scenery goes on it, just like when the paint is applied. You can really see here where this dip was earlier I was kind of filling in, and the CelluClay leaves a nice surface to put more scenery on. And you can see here where the CelluClay really helped to fill in that dip, and now it is a nice flat, smooth surface. Here is that big embankment I was working on, and this actually took 3 weeks to dry. I knew it would take that long, I just had to be patient. But I am happy with the end result. I think it's a very nice texture, and once I end up painting it some specific colors to match the prototype, I think it'll be a very nice kind of like almost postage stamp scene. The one thing I would change about it is using that toothpick to create these kind of erosion marks. I feel like I should have used maybe kind of like a bigger tool. So I might go in with some sort of file just to maybe widen these erosion marks. But overall, I'm very happy how this little scene turned out using CelluClay. So the last stop on this journey is this area. I put down CelluClay, and I tried to capture some of the drying process. So every 12 hours I captured a little footage. So in total, just this little section took, I think, like 3 to 4 days to dry. And then once it finally dried, I tried to give it a wash. Unfortunately, my camera stopped recording, so I only got this little bit at the beginning. And then I just finished off with like a second coat. The one thing here I noticed is I don't think it completely dried. I mean, it felt hard to the touch, but applying this wash, it softened up the CelluClay a little bit. So that's just something to be aware of, is giving it ample time to dry and I guess cure. But it still leaves a nice like texture once paint is applied. So my last few talking points before my conclusion about CelluClay is it still cuts pretty well. You can see here where I was cutting the foam and then I had to continue cutting into the CelluClay. It does take a little force to put the blade through the CelluClay, and as you can see here in this smaller example, it kind of goes right through the CelluClay. I was putting some force through it, but all in all, if you need to modify it and like cut it, it's not a big deal and pretty easy to do. Here I'm showing you can just break it apart with your hands. Maybe you prefer this over cutting it. I guess it just depends on how you apply it or how you want to modify it. But yeah, this is the inside texture of CelluClay. And then finally, CelluClay is a very light material once it dries. I know this is a small piece I'm flapping around in my hand, so it's a great material to have on the layout that won't weigh it down.
So that about wraps up this video on CelluClay. I hope I've convinced or persuaded you guys to give it a try. I know I'm glad I gave it a try myself. It's a very versatile product and I'm very happy with the results. And I plan on using it in many applications in the future. With that being said, I will see you guys in the next video.